Welcome to Rappahannock Issues. I'm Tom Cohen.
And I'm David Kerr.
And we're going to be looking at topics that are of interest to our community, both regionally and to the state. Welcome back to Rappahannock Issues. I'm Tom Cohen, joined here by Speaker Bill Howell, who's the delegate for Stafford County 28th District, which is Stafford and part of Fredericksburg. Right. We were talking about different bills. We talked about the budget. You had mentioned higher education and K-12 reforms.
Yeah, the K-12 reform, we've been working on that for a couple of years. There's been a lot of reaction, a lot of concern about the number of SOL tests that the kids have to take at the different grades. And I approve of the concept of standards of learning. It's a good way to check and see if the kids are learning what they're supposed to be learning. But teachers are concerned about teaching to the test and not being able to have more flexibility. And so over the last 2 years, we've taken a hard look at the SOLs, and we have reduced the number of tests that the kids have to take. I think by and large, the education establishment is pleased with that. I think the parents will be pleased, and I think it hasn't damaged the integrity of the standards of learning. We also had some work on charter schools. Virginia has a very weak charter school system, and we need to, I think, personally, we need to see what we can do to strengthen that. Higher education has become such a concern. Virginia has the best stable, if you will, of universities and community colleges all across the Commonwealth. But they're just getting more and more expensive, and there doesn't seem to be any limit on how far they can go on their expenses. There's over $1 billion in student debt in Virginia today, which is just unconscionable. And we're trying to look at different ways that we can put a cap on that. We had a bill in, when people go to Mary Washington or the University of Virginia or wherever, and they pay their student fees, one of those fees is an athletic fee where they have to pay sometimes as much as $1,200, $1,400 a year. It goes to the athletic department to help subsidize the sports that can't support themselves. Well, a lot of us think that's probably not a prime responsibility of getting an education. And again, $1,400 is a lot of money. And so we tried to put a cap on the athletic fees. It passed the House pretty significantly, but was slowed down in the Senate, and it's basically, we'll have to address it again next year. But we also had a couple of pieces of legislation dealing with distance learning where people can get their degrees online. And we're looking at a way of creating a higher education model that wouldn't cost any more than $15,000 for 4 years of education, and the bulk of it would be taught online. But I think that's the direction that a lot of higher education is going to have to go. It's interesting, Tom, we talk about the session, and every year there's a subject that comes up that you don't anticipate that turns to be a big subject. And this year, it was the subject of these Uber and Lyft, these cab companies that aren't cabs. You use an application on your phone and you punch it in and say, I need a car at such and such an address, and they show up and they take you. And they're very popular in a lot of the metropolitan areas, in the Northern Virginia area, in Richmond. I don't know if we have them in Fredericksburg yet or not. I don't think we do. But the people in Northern Virginia really wanted to protect this Uber and Lyft, I think is the other carrier, or maybe it's Lyft. But as you might imagine, the taxi cab companies were somewhat opposed because you're getting into their turf. And it was a classic turf battle fight that we were able to put all the players in a room and say, hey, you need to come up with some sort of compromise, or we may do something that neither of you like. And they came up with a good compromise, and it seemed to all work out. But again, it interested me, particularly since we don't have a whole lot of that type of activity in the Fredericksburg area, how important that was to the people in the metropolitan areas. And I think, quite candidly, it's an example of technology and different ways, new ways of doing things. And the younger generation seems to really approve of it.
And it's funny, two things, the K-12 reform with the SOLs. Part of that movement was the governor's teachers cabinet that made some recommendations to try to do that. And we discussed this last time you were on, that the SOLs are in a way an unfunded mandate by the state.
Yes.
And so, and that commission had teachers from around the state of all different purviews, and some of them involved in the Teachers Association. And so what you were saying is they merged the same way with your Uber.
Yeah.
You sort of get everybody to merge and come to agreement on something.
You hear a lot of political talk today about, I don't like compromise. I don't like any compromise. But compromise is what makes government work. If you look at the United States Constitution, it's basically a series of compromises that were made to get that wonderful document that we all revere, the United States Constitution. And I think that there's a place for compromise. Yeah, there's some things you don't compromise on because either you can't compromise on it from a practical standpoint, or it's against your standing, what you feel. But I think in a lot of areas, you need to get the groups in the room and work things out, as you did with your teachers' cabinet, as we did with Uber.
And it's sort of interesting you're talking about new technologies and such. There's been a lot of talk, and this is something we were saying we need to spread out our tax base and our businesses in Virginia, that commerce is changing. I mean, the brick and mortar stores are going away as more people, even elderly people, are using the internet and Amazon to buy things. And so as you were looking, I noticed you were saying trying to do more agriculture and manufacturing and stuff. But commercial is really changing in this country, isn't it?
Sure is. It sure is. You know, something that Virginia has really gotten sort of a head start on, and is a economic benefit, isn't really an employment benefit, are these data centers where they come together and all this stuff goes up into a cloud somewhere. But Virginia probably has more data centers, certainly by population, than any other state. They're very financially beneficial to the local governments because they pay a lot of property tax and they don't have many kids in school as a result. It's areas like that we need to look at. In Stafford, up in North Stafford at the Quantico Business Complex, they have a certified area for data centers, and I suspect one will come along there pretty soon and be a good boon to the county. Those are the kind of things we need to be looking at.
There was an article, I think, in the Washington Post and on all the major news networks that in Northern Virginia, in the next 20 years, the only two malls that will be remaining open will be Tyson's and Pentagon City, which really just changes the focus of what we're thinking of. And of course, tourism. We'd love to expand some of our tourism in our area. We have less than a minute left. What do you sort of envision heading in the future? I said you looked at some bills that you need to look at. Any other topics that are going to be sort of rearing their head as we head towards the next years?
Well, we always have concerns about health care providers and the health care that can be done. We always need to address that. Jobs, making the economy stronger in Virginia. We need to do things to make Virginia a even more attractive place for businesses to settle, and I think we can work on that. There's always the challenges that come up, whether it be higher education or K-12 or public safety. We deal with all of those issues, and I'm sure they're going to continue to present problems.
Well, one of our problems is we're only allowed 8 minutes per segment, and we're at the end of it. So I want to thank Speaker Howell again for coming with us, and hopefully as we move into the next session next year, we can have you again.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you. And come back after the break, and we will have one of our other local delegates come to talk to us.